The chamber was so vast that clouds formed near its ceiling. Ambassador David Cole stood at the center of an observation platform barely 10 feet wide, floating in empty space above an abyss that seemed to have no bottom. Around him, rising in endless spiraling tiers, sat the representatives of the Galactic Council. 3,000 species, 3,000 worlds, 3,000 pairs of eyes, or clusters of sensory organs, or hovering detection arrays, all focused on the single human who had been summoned to answer for his kind. The Supreme Adjudicator spoke first. It was a being made of crystallized sound, its body a shifting geometric pattern that hurt to look at directly. When it spoke, the words formed not in the air, but inside David's skull. Human designation Cole, you have been brought before this council to answer a simple question. Why does your species still exist? David did not flinch. He had been a diplomat for 30 years, first for the European Union, then for the United Nations, and finally for the newly formed Terran Coalition. He had negotiated with warlords, dictators, and corporate executives who considered human life a line item on a budget. An alien tribunal did not frighten him. I was not aware that existence required justification, he replied calmly. A wave of reaction swept through the tiers. Clicks and hisses and electromagnetic pulses and sounds beyond human hearing. The translator implant in. David's ears struggled to keep up with the overlapping responses. Outrage, disbelief, something. That might have been dark amusement, a creature that resembled a column of interlocking. Purple rings rose from its seat 300 levels above. Its voice was mechanical, filtered through translation systems older than human civilization. The human speaks as if it does not understand, typical of a primitive species. Allow me to clarify. The rings rotated slowly as it spoke. Earth is classified as a Category 7 death world. No species has ever achieved interstellar travel from such a world. The gravity alone should have crushed your development. The radiation should have sterilized your genetic code. The predatory ecosystem should have devoured your ancestors before they learned to walk upright. And yet, David said, here I am, yes. The Supreme Adjudicator's voice resonated with something cold. Here you are. 23 years after your first faster-than-light flight, you stand before us with a fleet of warships that rivals civilizations 100,000 years your senior. This is not natural. This is not possible. And this is why you have been summoned. David felt the weight of 3,000 alien stares pressing down on him. He thought of Earth, spinning peacefully somewhere in the vast darkness, unaware that its fate was being decided in this moment. He thought of his daughter, who was 7 years old and had never known a world without aliens in the sky. He thought of all the humans who had worked and bled and died to bring their species to this point. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small device no larger than a coin. He held it up so the council could see. Before I answer your question, he said, I would like to show you something. He pressed the button. Every light in the chamber flickered. The floating platforms trembled. On the massive display screens that ringed the chamber's upper levels, the image of Earth appeared, blue and green, and white against the black void. Then the image pulled back, and back, and back, until it showed not just Earth, but the space surrounding it. The space that was now filled with ships. 17,000 vessels. Cruisers and destroyers and carriers, and dreadnoughts and ships that had no classification, because nothing like them had ever been built before. They hung in formation around humanity's homeworld, like a constellation of steel and fire. That is not a threat, David said into the stunned silence. That is an answer. You ask why humanity still exists. We exist because we refuse to die. You ask how we built a fleet to rival ancient empires. We built it because we knew, from the moment we learned we were not alone, that something like this day would come. He lowered his hand. You have watched us for 50,000 years. You have seen us crawl from caves and build cities and burn those cities down and build them again. You have seen us split the atom and walk on our moon and reach for stars that everyone said we could never touch. And in all that time, not once did you offer help. Not once did you make contact. Not once did you do anything except watch and wait for us to destroy ourselves. His voice hardened. We disappointed you. And now you want to know why we are still here, as if our survival was some kind of insult to the natural order. Well, Supreme Adjudicator, here is your answer. We are here because that is what humans do. We survive. We adapt. We overcome. And we do not stop. The Supreme Adjudicator's form pulsed with something that might have been anger. Your speech is impressive, human. But words cannot change what you are. Your species was born from violence on a world that should not have produced life at all. You are dangerous. You are unpredictable. You are a threat to every civilized species in this galaxy. Perhaps, David acknowledged. But 3 days ago, we received a distress signal from a world called Thesan 4, a farming colony of 2 million souls, attacked by raiders, with no defenses and no hope of rescue. The Council's emergency fleet was 47 days away. Do you know how long it took us to respond? Silence. 19 minutes. 19 minutes from the moment we received the signal to the moment our ships arrived in orbit. We saved every single person on that planet, and we did it because someone asked for help, and we were able to give it. David stepped to the very edge of his platform, looking up at the endless tiers of alien representatives. You call us dangerous. You call us violent. You call us a threat. But when the Pelori of Thesan 4 needed salvation, they did not call you. They called us the monsters, the Deathworlders, the species you have spent 50,000 years trying to erase. He let the words hang in the air. So I ask you, Supreme Adjudicator, members of the Galactic Council, masters of 1,000 worlds, if we are the threat you fear, why did the innocent call upon us? Why did they trust us with their lives when they did not trust you? He turned slowly, letting his gaze sweep across the assembled representatives. Perhaps the answer to that question is more important than any answer I could give. The chamber fell into absolute silence. Not a click, not a hiss, not a whisper of movement. 3,000 species, frozen by the words of a single human, standing alone on a platform in the void. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the chamber's walls, 17,000 ships waited for the Council's response. This was how humanity introduced itself to the galaxy. Not with submission, not with fear, not with apologies for what they were, or pleas for acceptance they did not need, but with a simple truth that no one in that chamber could deny. When the universe called for help, humans answered. And that made all the difference. 3 days earlier, on the orbital communications station above Thesan 4, a young Pelori named Rin was working the night shift when the sensors detected something that should not have been there. The Pelori were a gentle species. They had evolved on a world with low gravity and soft light, where the most dangerous predator was a slow-moving fungal growth that could be avoided by simply walking in the other direction. They had joined the Galactic Council 60,000 years ago, one of the founding members, and in all that time they had never known war. Their colonies were agricultural havens, protected by Council law, untouchable by any species that wished to remain in good standing. Thesan 4 was their breadbasket. 12 billion Pelori across a dozen worlds depended on its harvests. The planet's surface was covered in vast fields of luminescent grain that swayed in patterns beautiful enough to move visitors to tears. Rin had taken the communications job because it was quiet. Nothing ever happened on Thesan 4, the most exciting, Event in the past year had been a minor software update to the weather monitoring systems. So when his sensor board lit up with 12 contacts of unknown configuration, each one larger than the orbital station itself, Rin assumed it was a glitch. He ran diagnostics. The contacts remained. He sent standard hailing frequencies. No response. He watched as the massive ships took up positions in orbit, spreading out to cover the entire planet in their shadow. He watched as smaller craft began to descend toward the surface. Then the transmissions began. Attention, inhabitants of this world. You are now property of the Harrowmind Collective. Resistance is not advised. Report to designated collection zones for processing. Compliance ensures survival. Rin's thin fingers trembled as he accessed the emergency protocols. Thesan 4 had no weapons. No military. Not even a police force capable of handling more than minor disputes. The planet relied entirely on Council protection. He sent the distress signal to the Council Emergency Response Fleet. The automated response came back in seconds. A calm, mechanical voice that Rin had heard 1,000 times in training simulations, but never believed he would hear in reality. Distress signal received. Estimated response time, 47 standard days. Remain calm. Assistance is coming. 47 days. The landing craft would reach the surface in 6 hours. Rin stared at his console. On the surface below, 2 million of his people were waking to a nightmare. Families were being dragged from their homes. Workers in the fields were being rounded up by armored figures that moved with mechanical precision. The Harrowmind Collective, whoever they were, was claiming an entire civilization as property, and the Council's response was 47 days away. Rin thought of his sister, who worked in the southern grain processing facilities. He thought of his parents, retired to a small dwelling near the equatorial forests. He thought of everyone he had ever known on this world, all of them helpless, all of them waiting for a rescue that would come far too late. He did something. Forbiddens. Every communications operator knew about the restricted frequencies. They were leftover channels from before the current protocols, abandoned wavelengths that no legitimate species used anymore. But Rin had heard rumors. Everyone had heard rumors. There was a species out there. A new one, barely 2 decades old in terms of interstellar presence. They had emerged from a world so hostile that the Council had classified it as unsurvivable. They had built ships that moved faster than anything else in the galaxy. They had refused to submit to Council oversight, establishing their own territory and their own laws. They were called humans, and they were said to answer calls for help. Rin did not know the frequency, but his cousin worked in the diplomatic corps, and after too much celebratory wine at a family gathering, she had mentioned that certain officials carried emergency codes, codes that could reach the humans directly. He found her personal files in the shared family archive. He found the frequency. His hands shook as he entered the numbers. This was illegal. This could end his career. This could bring consequences he could not imagine. But 47 days was too long, and someone had to try. He typed the message quickly, afraid he would lose his nerve. SOS. Thesan 4. Hostile force. 2 million. Civilians. No defenses. Council response 47 days. Please help, he transmitted. For 17 minutes. Nothing happened. Rin sat in the dim light of his console, watching the Harrowmind ships establish complete control over his world. He watched reports flood in from the surface. Families separated. Livestock slaughtered. Ancient cultural sites being demolished to make room for processing facilities. Then his console chirped. A response. 3 words in a language his translator needed a moment to process. On our way. Rin did not know what to feel. Relief? Hope? Terror at what he had unleashed? He sat frozen, watching his sensors, waiting for something to happen not 20-3 minutes after his transmission. Space itself tore open at the edge of the system. A ship emerged. It was smaller than the Harrowmind vessels, perhaps a third of their size, but it moved with a speed that Rin's sensors refused to calculate. It crossed the distance from the system's edge to high orbit in under 4 minutes, a journey that should have taken hours. Then it stopped. Not decelerated, stopped. One instant it was moving at impossible velocity, the next it hung motionless. Directly between the orbital station and the nearest Harrowmind ship, transmission came through on the emergency frequency. A human voice, female, calm and clear. Thesan 4 Station. This is Commander Eva Brandt of the Terran Coalition vessel Swift Response. We received your signal. Are the hostiles taking prisoners or casualties? Rin found his voice. Prisoners. They are collecting civilians. No deaths reported yet. Understood. Stand by. On his sensors, Rin watched the human ship approach the nearest Harrowmind vessel. It was a fraction of the size, insignificant against the massive bulk of the invader. It should not have been a threat. Commander Brandt's voice returned, this time on an open frequency that every ship in the system could hear. Unidentified vessels in Thesan 4 orbit. This is the Terran Coalition. You are engaged in hostile action against a civilian population under our protection. You have 30 seconds to cease all operations and withdraw. This is not a negotiation. The Harrowmind flagship responded. The voice was cold, mechanical, utterly confident. Human vessel, you have no jurisdiction here. This world is salvage under Council law. Withdraw or be destroyed. 28 seconds passed. Rin saw a flash of light from the human ship. Brief. Impossibly bright. The nearest Harrowmind vessel vanished. Not exploded. Not disabled. Vanished. One moment it was there, and the next it simply was not. As if it had never existed at all, Commander Brandt's voice returned to the open channel. Unchanged in tone. 29 seconds. That was a warning. The next one will not be. The remaining Harrowmind ships did not move. Their landing craft froze mid-descent. The armored figures on the surface stopped in their tracks. Then, at the edge of Rin's sensor range, more ships began to appear. Not one at a time, but in waves. Dozens, then hundreds. Human vessels surrounded the Harrowmind collective in a sphere of weapons that Rin did not recognize and could not begin to understand. Commander Brandt spoke again, and this time there was something in her voice that Rin would later recognize as absolute certainty. You came to take prisoners. You came to claim lives as property. You came because you thought no one would stop you. A pause. You were wrong. Now leave, and never come back. The Harrowmind collective left. They abandoned their landing craft. They abandoned their equipment. They fled into the darkness between stars, and they did not look back. On the surface of Thesan 4, 2 million Pelori looked up at the sky and saw human ships descending with medical supplies and food and rescue teams that asked nothing in return except a chance to help. Rin sat in his station, watching it all unfold, and understood that the galaxy had just changed forever. The monsters had come, and they had come to save. The summons arrived 48 hours after the last. Harrowmind ship fled Thesan 4. Ambassador David Cole received it while standing on the bridge of the Coalition flagship, watching human medical teams coordinate the largest humanitarian operation in galactic history. The message was brief and formal. The Galactic Council demanded humanity's immediate presence at the Grand Tribunal Chamber. The charges listed were extensive. Unauthorized military action, destruction of licensed commercial vessels, violation of territorial sovereignty, and something called existential provocation. which David's staff could not find defined anywhere in council law. His aide, a young officer named Thomas Reyes, read the charges with growing disbelief. "They are charging us with saving lives," he said. "They are actually prosecuting us for rescuing people." David did not share his aide's surprise. He had been expecting this since the moment the coalition fleet appeared over Thesan 4. The council had maintained power for 300,000 years by ensuring that no single species could challenge its authority. Humanity had just demonstrated capabilities that threatened that balance. Of course, there would be consequences. "Prepare my diplomatic credentials," David said. "I will go alone." "Sir, that is extremely inadvisable. The Council has no reason to honor diplomatic immunity for a non-member species." "They have every reason. If something happens to me, 17,000 ships will be asking questions. The Council may be arrogant, but they are not stupid." The journey to the Council's headquarters took 4 days. David spent the time reviewing everything humanity knew about galactic politics, which was less than he would have liked. The Council had existed for 300 millennia. Its bureaucracy was older than human civilization. Its laws numbered in the millions. Finding the right approach to this trial would require careful thought. But David had one advantage that no other species possessed. He knew what humanity was capable of. And more importantly, he knew what humanity was willing to become. The Grand Tribunal Chamber was designed to intimidate, and it succeeded. David felt the weight of it pressing down on him as he took his place on the floating platform at the chamber's center. 3,000 species surrounded him in endless spiraling tiers, their forms ranging from the familiar to the incomprehensible. Some were recognizable as biological. Others appeared to be pure energy or crystallized mathematics or something beyond human understanding entirely. Supreme Adjudicator opened the proceedings. With a voice that resonated inside David's skull, "Play." Accused will identify itself for the record. David Cole, Ambassador Plenipotentiary of the Terran Coalition, representing the human species of Earth. The charges have been transmitted. Does the accused understand the nature of these proceedings? I understand that the Council believes it has jurisdiction over humanity's actions. I dispute that belief, but I will hear the charges. A ripple of reaction passed through the tiers. The Council was not accustomed to species disputing its authority. The prosecutor was a being that existed as a cloud of interconnected nodes, each one pulsing with blue light. Its voice was synthesized from 1,000 separate sources speaking in perfect unison. The facts are not in dispute. On the date in question, human military vessels entered Council space without authorization. They engaged and destroyed 11 vessels belonging to the Haramind Collective, a licensed salvage operation registered with this Council. They deployed armed forces to the surface of Thesan 4, a Council-member world without permission from local authorities. These actions constitute clear violations of territorial sovereignty and threaten the stability of galactic peace. David listened without expression. He had expected exactly this argument. Furthermore, the prosecutor continued, the human species has demonstrated military capabilities that exceed any projection based on their developmental timeline. A species that achieved faster-than-light travel merely 23 years ago should not possess weapons capable of eliminating vessels in a single strike. This discrepancy suggests either that humanity has received prohibited assistance from an external source, or that they have concealed their true nature from the Council. Either possibility represents a grave threat to galactic security. The prosecutor paused, its nodes flickering in a pattern that suggested satisfaction. In light of these facts, the prosecution recommends that humanity be classified as a hostile species, subject to immediate containment protocols. Their fleet should be disbanded. Their technology should be confiscated. Their expansion beyond their home system should be permanently prohibited. The chamber hummed with approval from dozens of species. David could feel the tide turning against humanity, feel the weight of ancient prejudices and fears pressing down on everything he hoped to accomplish. He waited until the noise subsided before speaking. "May I respond?" The supreme adjudicator's form pulsed. "The accused may address the charges." David did not address the charges. Instead, he asked a question. "How many of you have heard of Earth before today?" Silence. 17,000 species are represented in this chamber. Before the events at Thyssen 4, how many of you knew that humans existed? The prosecutor's nodes flickered with irritation. The question is irrelevant to the proceedings. On the contrary, it is central to them. The Council has monitored Earth 50,000 years. 50,000 years of observation. 50,000 years of data collection. And in all that time, not once did the Council make contact with humanity. Not once did it offer membership or alliance, or even acknowledgement that we were here. Why? David turned slowly, letting his gaze sweep across the assembled representatives. "I will tell you why. Because you expected us to die. Category 7 Deathworlds do not produce spacefaring civilizations. That is what your models say. That is what your experience suggests. The conditions on such worlds are too extreme, the evolutionary pressures too severe. Intelligent life cannot emerge, and if it does, it cannot survive long enough to reach the stars." He paused. "We broke your models. We survived. We evolved intelligence under gravity that would crush most Council species. We developed technology while swimming in radiation that would be lethal to half this chamber. We built civilizations and destroyed them and built them again, over and over, until we finally reached for the stars and found them within our grasp." His voice hardened. "And when we got there, we found a galaxy that had been watching us struggle and suffer and die, and had never once lifted a finger to help. We found a galaxy that had already classified us as a threat before we ever had a chance to prove what we could become. We found a galaxy that treated our mere existence as a crime." The prosecutor attempted to interrupt. "This is not relevant to the charges." "It is absolutely relevant. You accuse us of unauthorized military action. We saved 2 million lives. You accuse us of destroying licensed vessels. Those vessels were enslaving civilians. You accuse us of violating territorial sovereignty. We responded to a distress call that your own emergency fleet could not answer for 47 days. David stepped to the edge of his platform. The Pelori of Thyssen 4 did not call the Council for help. They called us. They reached out across the void to a species they had never met, a species they had been told was dangerous and violent and savage, and they begged us for salvation. And we answered. In 19 minutes, we answered. He let the words hang in the air. So I ask you, members of the Council, defenders of galactic peace, guardians of 1,000 worlds, if we are the monsters you fear, why did the innocent call upon us? Why did they trust us with their lives when they did not trust you? The chamber fell silent. 3,000 species, confronted with a question none of them could answer. David Cole stood alone on his platform, waiting for the Council's response, knowing that whatever happened next would determine humanity's place in the galaxy forever. But he was not afraid. He had spoken the truth, and sometimes that was enough. The tribunal recessed. Ambassador David Cole was escorted to a holding chamber deep within the Council station, a comfortable room with no windows and only one door. He was not surprised when that door opened 3 hours later to admit a visitor. He had not expected that the being that entered had no fixed form. It shifted between shapes like smoke, caught in competing winds, sometimes resembling something humanoid, sometimes expanding into patterns that hurt to look at directly. When it spoke, the voice came from everywhere at once. Ambassador Cole, I am called the Keeper of Records. I maintain the Council's historical archives. I have existed in this capacity for 200,000 years. David remained seated. You are not here to prosecute me. No, I am here to tell you the truth. The truth that the Council will never share. The truth that explains why you are really here. And why would you do that? The Keeper's form stabilized slightly, resolving into something almost human-shaped. Because the alternative is a war that will destroy everything. The Council, humanity, the galaxy itself. I have seen civilizations rise and fall for longer than your species has existed. I recognize the patterns, and I know what is coming unless someone intervenes. David studied the shifting figure before him. Then tell me, 300,000 years ago, the Council was different, smaller, more fragile. It was a coalition of species struggling to survive in a hostile universe. And it was at war. The chamber's walls shimmered and became displays. Images appeared of ancient vessels engaged in combat, of worlds burning, of civilizations being erased from existence. The enemy was called the Wraith Dominion. They emerged from a world much like yours. A death world. Category 7. They should not have survived their own evolution. But they did. And when they reached the stars, they did not seek allies or trading partners. They sought conquest. The images showed something terrible. Ships that seemed to devour light itself. Armies that moved like a single organism. Worlds stripped of all resources and left as dead husks floating in the void. The Wraith were everything the Council feared. Fast where we were slow. Aggressive where we were cautious. Adaptive where we were rigid. They conquered 17,000 worlds in less than a century. They were unstoppable. What happened to them? We won, eventually, at cost that cannot be calculated. 90% of Council species were driven to extinction. The survivors made a pact. Never again would a Death World species be allowed to reach the stars. Any world capable of producing such beings would be monitored, quarantined, and if necessary, David felt cold settle in his chest. Sterilized. Yes, Earth was scheduled for sterilization 7 times in your history. The asteroid that killed your dominant species 65 million years ago was not natural. Neither were several extinction events that followed. We tried to prevent your emergence. We failed. You made us, David said slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. No, we tried to unmake you. Every obstacle we placed, you overcame. Every extinction we engineered, you evolved past. We gave you ice ages. You invented fire. We gave you plagues. You invented medicine. We gave you internal conflicts, feeding the knowledge of destructive technologies to your scientists. Certain you would destroy yourselves. The Keeper's form flickered with something that might have been shame. You did not destroy yourselves. You came close, many times, but always you pulled back from the edge. Always you found a way to survive. Until finally, the Council realized that continuing to try would only make you stronger. So we watched. We waited. We hoped that time would accomplish what we could not. David stood slowly, his mind racing through the implications. And now we have arrived. And you still cannot decide what to do with us. Precisely. You have demonstrated capabilities that rival the Wraith at their peak. You have shown that you can respond to threats with overwhelming force. But you have also done something the Wraith never did. What? You answered a call for help. You protected those who could not protect themselves. You saved lives when you could have simply conquered. The Wraith never did that. They only destroyed. David understood. You are trying to determine if we are the same as them. Yes, the Council believes you are. They believe that what you showed at Thiessen 4 was merely strategy, a display designed to win allies before you begin your conquest. They are afraid, Ambassador, more afraid than they have been in 300,000 years. And afraid species make dangerous decisions. What kind of decisions? The keeper was silent for a long moment. There is a faction within the council that believes the only safe course of action is preemptive elimination. They are preparing to present evidence at the tribunal. Evidence that will recommend humanity's immediate destruction before you become the next Wraith Dominion. David felt his blood turn to ice. They want to kill us. All of us. They want to prevent what they believe is inevitable. They have 300,000 years of fear guiding their judgment. They have the memory of 17,000 dead worlds whispering in their ears. And they have no reason to believe that you will be different. But I am different. We are different. You may be. But saying so is not enough. You must prove it. And you must prove it in a way that the council cannot ignore or explain away. David thought of his daughter, 7 years old, who had never known a world without aliens in the sky. He thought of Earth spinning peacefully in the void, unaware that its existence hung by a thread. He thought of 17,000 ships waiting for orders, ready to defend humanity against any threat. How? He asked. How do I prove that we are not what they fear? The keeper's form shifted, becoming more solid, more defined. Something that almost resembled a face looked at David with ancient, weary eyes. By telling them the truth. All of it. Every dark chapter of human history. Every war. Every atrocity. Every moment when your species stood at the edge of self-destruction. Show them what you have been. And then show them what you have chosen to become instead. That could destroy any chance of acceptance. Perhaps. But it is also the only thing that might save you. The council fears the unknown. They fear species that hide their true nature. If you stand before them and show them everything, including the darkness, they will have no choice but to see you as you truly are. Flawed, dangerous, but capable of choosing something better. The keeper moved toward the door. The tribunal reconvenes in 6 hours. What you do with that time will determine whether humanity survives the next year. It paused at the threshold. For what it is worth, Ambassador, I hope you succeed. In 200,000 years, I have seen many species face this moment. Most chose denial. Most chose aggression. Most are now extinct. Perhaps humanity will be different. Perhaps you will be the ones who finally break the cycle. The door closed. David stood alone in the chamber. The weight of 300,000 years of history pressing down on his shoulders. He had 6 hours to prepare a defense that would determine the fate of his entire species. He had 6 hours to convince ancient beings that humans were not the monsters they feared. He had 6 hours to save the world. He sat down and began to write. The tribunal reconvened at the appointed hour. Ambassador David Cole returned to his platform at the center of the grand chamber, but something had changed. The representatives in the tiers above him sensed it. A tension hung in the air that had not been there before. The supreme adjudicator's crystalline form pulsed with anticipation. The prosecution will present its final evidence. The prosecutor's cloud of interconnected nodes drifted forward. The prosecution calls for immediate implementation of containment. Protocol 7. The human species represents an existential threat to galactic civilization. Their capabilities exceed any predictive model. Their intentions remain unclear. The only responsible course of action is preemptive neutralization before they become another Wraith Dominion. A murmur swept through the chamber. The name had not been spoken in council proceedings for millennia. Its invocation carried weight that transcended ordinary political maneuvering. The prosecution presents historical analysis demonstrating that all Category 7 species follow identical behavioral patterns. Rapid technological advancement. aggressive territorial expansion, eventual conflict with established powers. Humanity has already demonstrated the first two patterns. The third is merely a matter of time. The nodes pulsed with finality. We recommend destruction of Earth and all human colonies. We recommend it be carried out immediately, before their fleet can interfere. We recommend that no trace of this species be allowed to survive. The chamber fell silent. 3,000 species waited for the council's judgment. The supreme adjudicator turned to David. "Does the accused wish to respond?" David stepped forward. He had spent 6 hours preparing for this moment. He had written speeches and discarded them. He had crafted arguments and found them wanting. In the end, he had made a different choice. "I do not wish to respond," he said. "I wish to show." He activated the chamber's display systems, not with the small device he had used before, but with full authorization from the Keeper of Records, who had granted him access to technology no non-council species had ever touched. The displays came alive with images of Earth, but not the Earth the council expected to see, not the blue marble spinning peacefully in the void. Instead, the chamber filled with images of horror, war, suffering, death. David showed them the trenches of the First World War, where millions died fighting over miles of mud. He showed them the concentration camps of the Second World War, where humanity's capacity for evil reached depths that still haunted the species' collective memory. He showed them the mushroom clouds rising over cities, the moment when humans first gained the power to destroy themselves entirely. The council watched in growing confusion. This was not how accused species defended themselves. This was not how anyone seeking survival presented their case. David continued. He showed them the famines and the plagues. He showed them the genocides and the atrocities. He showed them every dark chapter of human history, every moment when the species had failed to live up to its potential. And then he stopped. "This is what we are," he said into the silence. "This is what we have been. You are right to fear us. You are right to try to destroy us. Everything you see on these screens proves that we are capable of becoming exactly what you fear." He paused. "But this is not all that we are." The images changed. Now, the displays showed something different. Scientists working to cure diseases. Doctors treating the sick without regard for payment. Soldiers throwing themselves on grenades to save their comrades. Ordinary people risking their lives to help strangers they would never meet. Every atrocity we committed, someone stood against it. Every war we fought, someone worked to end it. Every time we stood at the edge of the abyss, someone pulled us back. David's voice softened. "We are not good. We are not pure. We are not what you would call civilized. But we are capable of choice. And again, throughout our history, we have chosen to be better than our worst impulses." He turned to face the supreme adjudicator directly. The Wraith Dominion conquered because that was all they knew. They destroyed because destruction was their nature. But we are different. We know what we are capable of. We have seen our own darkness, and we have chosen to walk toward the light instead. He gestured toward the displays, which now showed the rescue operation at Thiessen 4, human ships descending with medical supplies, human soldiers carrying Pelori children to safety, human doctors working through the night to save lives. When the Pelori called for help, we did not calculate strategic advantage. We did not weigh political implications. We heard beings in distress, and we went to help them. That is who we are now. That is who we choose to be. David stepped to the very edge of his platform. "You can destroy us. Your combined forces could probably overwhelm our fleet if you committed fully to the attack. We would fight. We would make it costly. But eventually, you would win." He spread his hands. "Or you can take a chance. You can accept that we are not the Wraith. You can accept that beings born from violence can choose peace. You can accept that the universe is capable of redemption. He looked up at the endless tiers of alien representatives. I cannot promise that we will never fail. I cannot promise that we will always choose correctly. But I can promise that we will try. And I can promise that when someone calls for help, we will answer. The chamber remained silent for a long moment. Then, from somewhere high in the tiers, a single voice spoke. The Pelori delegation wishes to address the tribunal. The Supreme Adjudicator's form pulsed with surprise. Proceed. A slender figure rose from its seat. Rin, the communications officer who had sent the original distress call, had been brought to the proceedings as a witness. Now he spoke for his people. The humans saved us. Not because they had to. Not because they would gain anything from it. They saved us because we asked, and they were able to help. His voice trembled, but did not break. I do not know if they are what you fear. I do not know what they might become in 100 years or 1,000. But I know what they are now. They are the ones who came when no one else would. And that is enough for me. He sat down. The Supreme Adjudicator was silent for a long moment. Then it spoke. The council will deliberate. The deliberation lasted 3 days. David remained in his chamber, receiving no information, permitted no contact with the outside. He did not know if he had succeeded or failed. He did not know if humanity would survive the week. On the 4th day, the tribunal reconvened for the final time. The council has reached a verdict. David stood on his platform, alone, surrounded by 3,000 species that held his world's fate in their hands. On the charges of unauthorized military action, the council finds humanity guilty. However, the council acknowledges that this action preserved lives that would otherwise have been lost. No penalty is imposed. A murmur swept through the chamber. On the charges of territorial violation, the council finds humanity guilty. However, the council acknowledges that humanity made no attempt to claim or occupy the territory in question. No penalty is imposed. David allowed himself to breathe. On the recommendation of Containment Protocol 7, the chamber fell absolutely silent. The council declines to implement. The evidence presented demonstrates that humanity, while dangerous, is not equivalent to the threat previously faced by this body. The human species is granted provisional membership in the Galactic Council, subject to ongoing review. The chamber erupted. Some species shouted in outrage. Others expressed something that might have been relief. But David heard none of it. He was thinking of his daughter, who would grow up in a galaxy that had chosen to give humanity a chance. He was thinking of Earth, which would survive to see another sunrise. He was thinking of all the calls for help that would come in the years ahead, and all the times humanity would answer them. The monsters had been accepted. The Deathworlders had found their place among the stars, and somewhere in the vast darkness of space, a young Pelori named Rin smiled, knowing that the universe had just become a little less lonely. 1 year later, the emergency frequency monitored by the Terran Coalition received its 1,000th distress call. Average response time, 14 minutes. Humanity had found its purpose, and the galaxy would never be the same.